When you've been married for a while, you start to think you know the person sleeping next to you every night. That was me 5 years into my marriage with Sophia. I thought I had it all figured out. We weren't perfect, what couple is? But we had this rhythm, this unspoken understanding that kept everything running smoothly. Or so I thought. Sophia and I met in the most unremarkable way, at a bookstore, of all places. I was flipping through a biography I knew I'd never actually buy, and she was in the next aisle, frowning at a cookbook. We exchanged a few words, something about how recipes always seem easier in print than in practice, and that was it. 2 months later, we were officially a couple. A year after that, we were married. Simple. Straightforward. That's how I always described our relationship. Life was steady after we tied the knot. I worked in IT, clocking in and out of a job that didn't excite me but paid the bills. Sophia, though? She was the vibrant one. A teacher who lit up whenever she talked about her students. She had this way of making people feel seen. Like when she looked at you, you were the only person that mattered. I loved that about her. Loved her. We settled into a modest house not far from her mom, Margaret. Now, let me tell you, Margaret was a force of nature. One of those women who always seemed to have a list of things you could be doing better. Why don't you fix that leaky faucet, Michael? Or, Sophia deserves a bigger house. You should consider a promotion. She wasn't subtle, that's for sure. But she adored Sophia, and Sophia adored her right back. When Margaret got sick, it was like a switch flipped in Sophia. She spent every waking moment at her mom's side, organizing doctor visits, cooking meals, even learning to handle the medication schedules. I tried to help where I could, offering rides, picking up groceries, but it never felt like enough. Sophia would just wave me off, saying, "I've got it, Michael. You don't need to worry." And at first I didn't. After all, what kind of husband would I be if I couldn't support her through this? But the longer it went on, the more I noticed the cracks forming. It wasn't just the late nights at Margaret's or the missed dinners. It was the way Sophia looked through me instead of at me, like I was part of the furniture. Her smiles, once warm and effortless, started to feel like something she had to drag out of herself. And I told myself it was temporary. A phase. Grief does strange things to people, doesn't it? Then came the day Margaret was moved into hospice care. I remember standing in the kitchen, Sophia stirring a pot of soup she'd made specifically for her mom. Gluten-free, dairy-free, tasteless, if you ask me. I told her, "You're doing great. You know that?" She didn't even look up, just nodded and said, "Thanks, Michael." That was it. No smile, no warmth, just emptiness. I think that was the moment I started to realize something wasn't right, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. Looking back, the signs were probably there from the start. The weekend workshops that popped up out of nowhere. The calls she'd step outside to take, saying it was her sister or a friend from work. I even joked once, "What's the secret, Sophia? Are you leading a double life?" She just laughed and said, "If I were, you'd never know." It was funny then. Hilarious. Even. Now? Not so much. Still, I chalked it up to stress. I mean, her mom was dying. What kind of husband wouldn't cut his wife some slack in a situation like that? So I let it slide. All of it. The distance, the strange phone calls, the nights she said she needed space to process things. I thought I was being understanding. Thought I was being supportive. Turns out, I was just being blind. Funny how you can miss what's right in front of you, isn't it? Like walking into a dark room and stumbling over a piece of furniture you've lived with for years. You think you know where everything is until you don't. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At this point, all I knew was that my wife was slipping away, and I had no idea how to stop it. If you've ever sat through a funeral, you know it's not the speeches or the prayers that get to you. It's the silence. That oppressive quiet when the service is over and everyone is just there, shuffling their feet, trying to figure out what to say next. That's what I remember most about Margaret's funeral. That, and the look on Sophia's face. She didn't cry. Not the way I expected her to. There were tears, sure, but they were brief, wiped away almost as soon as they appeared. Instead, she had this hollow, faraway expression, like her body was in that church, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. I tried to hold her hand, to offer her something. Comfort, maybe? Reassurance. But she pulled away, her fingers slipping out of mine like water. "I'm fine, Michael," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't. I spent most of the service watching her. Not intentionally, but I couldn't help it. Sophia was the kind of person who could light up a room without even trying. But that day, she looked dimmed, like someone had switched off her inner glow. It scared me, if I'm honest. I wanted to reach out, to say something that would bring her back. But what do you say to someone who's just buried their mother? "Are you okay?" feels ridiculous, and "I'm here for you" feels like a platitude. So I said nothing. After the service, people gathered in the church hall for the usual post-funeral rituals. Sandwiches, lukewarm coffee, awkward conversations about how she's in a better place now. Sophia barely spoke to anyone. She drifted from group to group, nodding politely, but her mind was clearly elsewhere. I tried to stay close, to be a silent pillar of support, but she kept moving, like she couldn't bear to be still for too long. Then, just as the crowd started thinning out, she pulled me aside. "Michael, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady in a way that set my nerves on edge. "Can it wait until we get home?" I asked, trying to mask my unease with a weak smile. "No," she said, shaking her head. "It can't." We stepped outside, the crisp air a sharp contrast to the stuffy warmth of the hall. Sophia turned to face me, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her knuckles white. "There's something I need to tell you," she began, her eyes fixed on a spot just over my shoulder. I braced myself. "Okay," I said slowly. "What is it?" She hesitated, just for a moment, and then the words came out in a rush. "I have a second family." I blinked, certain I'd misheard her. "A second, what?" I asked, my voice cracking on the last word. "A second family," she repeated, her tone flat, almost detached. "A husband, 2 kids. I've been with him for years." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and unreal. "You're joking," I said, though I knew she wasn't. Sophia had many faults, but she wasn't cruel. She wouldn't joke about something like this. "I'm not joking," she said, her voice firm. "I've been living a double life, Michael. And now it's time for me to choose. I'm leaving. I'm going to be with them." I think I laughed, though there was nothing funny about it. "You're leaving?" I echoed, the words foreign and bitter on my tongue. "Just like that? After everything?" She nodded, and for the first time that day, I saw something in her eyes, guilt, regret, maybe, but it was fleeting, gone as quickly as it came. "I'm sorry, Michael," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But this is how it has to be." I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to shake her until she explained how the woman I thought I knew could have kept something like this from me. But I couldn't. My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. All I could manage was a choked, "Why?" Her gaze finally met mine, and for a second, I thought I saw a flicker of the Sophia I fell in love with. "Because they need me more than you do," she said quietly. "I'm sorry." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in the cold, my world crumbling around me. I stood there long after she walked away, rooted to the spot like some kind of idiot. My legs wouldn't move. My brain wouldn't work. The words she just said, "I have a second family," played over and over in my head, as if repeating them enough times would make them make sense. Spoiler alert, they didn't. Eventually, I made it back to the car. How, I don't remember. Everything felt like a haze, like I was watching my own life play out on some dimly lit stage. When I got home, I sat on the couch for what must have been hours, staring at the empty space where Sophia's shoes usually sat by the door. It was stupid, but that's what got me, the shoes. Something so small and mundane suddenly felt like a punch to the gut. She was gone, and she wasn't coming back. I tried calling her once, just once. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What would I have said? "Hey, Sophia, just wondering how your other husband and kids are doing?" No, I wasn't ready to hear her voice, to deal with whatever excuses or half-truths she might throw my way. So, I hung up and threw my phone on the coffee table, the screen lighting up the dark room like some kind of accusation. The next few days were surreal. I went through the motions, work, eat, sleep, but it all felt meaningless. My colleagues must have noticed something was off, but no one said anything, thank God. The last thing I needed was sympathy, or, worse, questions. At home, the silence was unbearable. I kept expecting to hear her laugh from the kitchen, or see her curled up on the couch with a book. But she wasn't there, and every reminder of her, the framed photos on the wall, the half-empty jar of her favorite coffee, felt like a dagger to the chest. I considered throwing her things out, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. The worst part, though, was the not knowing. How long had she been living this double life? Years, she said. But how many? Did it start before we got married? After? And who was this other guy? Was he better than me? Smarter? Richer? More exciting? The questions ate at me, keeping me up at night, my mind racing with scenarios I couldn't confirm or deny. I wanted answers, but I was terrified of them at the same time. What if the truth was even worse than I imagined? What if it confirmed every insecurity I'd ever had, every doubt I'd ever pushed aside? So, I did nothing. I sat with my anger and confusion and heartbreak, letting it fester like an open wound. Then, about a week after she left, Sophia came back. I didn't hear the door open. I was in the kitchen, washing a plate that didn't even need washing. When I turned around, there she was, standing in the doorway like a ghost. Her hair was a mess, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes, God, her eyes, looked like they hadn't seen sleep in days. "Michael," she said, her voice shaky. What are you doing here?" I cut her off, my tone sharper than I intended. I wasn't ready to play the forgiving husband. Not yet. Maybe not ever. "I need to talk to you," she said, stepping into the kitchen. She looked around like she barely recognized the place, like it had been years instead of days since she left. "Something's wrong." I folded my arms, leaning back against the counter. "Something's wrong," I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Gee, you don't say. What could possibly be wrong, Sophia? Is it the part where you walked out on me for your secret family? Or the part where you didn't even have the decency to explain why?" She winced, but I didn't care. She deserved to feel every bit of the pain she'd inflicted on me. "It's not like that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't. It's complicated." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Complicated. Right. Because leading a double life is just so hard to explain. "Try me, Sophia. I've got nothing but time." She hesitated, her hands twisting together like she was trying to wring the truth out of herself. Finally, she said, "They know." "Who knows?" I asked, my patience wearing thin. "My other family," she said, her voice cracking. "They know about you. About everything." For a moment, I didn't know whether to be angry or relieved. Angry because she'd put me in this position, or relieved because, finally, there was some kind of consequence for her lies. "And," I said, crossing my arms, "what do they think about your little double life?" Sophia looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe. They threw me out. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, but it never came. She looked utterly broken, like the weight of her choices had finally come crashing down on her. And for a split second, I felt sorry for her. But just for a second. You'd think after dropping the bombshell that she had a whole other life, a second family, for crying out loud. Sophia showing up at my door again would have been the last thing I wanted. And yet, there she was, standing in my kitchen, looking like a shell of the woman I used to know. "They threw me out," she said again, her voice trembling. She wouldn't even look me in the eye. Good. She didn't deserve to. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. "Oh, they threw you out?" I said, the sarcasm dripping from my words. "Poor Sophia. I guess it's tough when people find out you've been lying to them, huh?" Her head dropped, and for a second, I thought she might cry. But no, Sophia wasn't one to fall apart easily. She took a deep breath, like she was trying to steady herself, and said, "You don't understand, Michael. It's not just that they found out. It's worse. Worse." I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. What could possibly be worse than living a double life and having it all come crashing down? Please, enlighten me. Her hands were shaking now, clutching the edge of the kitchen table like it was the only thing holding her up. He's dangerous, Michael. He told me if I ever came near them again, she trailed off, her voice cracking. I wanted to ask what he had threatened her with, but I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Dangerous? I said, raising an eyebrow. You mean the guy you've been married to behind my back? The one you chose over me? Forgive me if I don't feel like jumping to your rescue right now. Her head snapped up at that, her eyes wide and pleading. You don't understand, she said again, her voice rising. I didn't choose him. I didn't choose any of this. I was. Stop, I said, holding up a hand. Just stop, Sophia. You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choices, and now you're dealing with the consequences. Don't come to me looking for sympathy. She flinched like I'd slapped her, and for a moment, there was nothing but silence between us. Then, out of nowhere, she let out this gut-wrenching scream. It wasn't the kind of scream you make when you stub your toe or see a spider. It was raw, primal, like something inside her had finally broken. I froze, unsure of what to do. Sophia, what the hell? I started, but she dropped to her knees before I could finish, clutching her head with both hands. I messed up, she sobbed. I messed up so badly, Michael. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know how to fix any of it. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Pity, maybe? No, not pity. Sadness, perhaps. Because as much as I hated what she'd done, seeing her like this, completely unraveled, reminded me of the woman I used to love, the woman I thought I'd married. I crouched down, keeping my distance but lowering myself to her level. Sophia, I said carefully, my voice softer than I intended. You need to pull yourself together. Screaming and crying isn't going to fix anything. She looked up at me then, her face streaked with tears, her eyes bloodshot. I don't know where else to go, she whispered. He doesn't want me. You don't want me. I have no one. The words hit me harder than I expected. No one. The thing is, she wasn't wrong. Her choices had burned every bridge she'd ever built. She'd alienated her other husband, her children, and me. All for what? A life built on lies? I should have been angry. Hell, I was angry. But I was also tired. Tired of the drama. Tired of the pain. Tired of her. You have no one because you pushed everyone away, Sophia, I said, standing up. That's on you. Not me. Not him. You. She didn't respond, just sat there on the floor, her shoulders shaking as she cried. For a moment, I thought about walking away, just turning around, leaving her there, and letting her figure it out on her own. But something stopped me. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was that stupid, stubborn part of me that still cared, even after everything. I spoke quietly, my voice firmer than I expected. You can stay here for a few days, Sophia, just until you figure out where to go next. But don't mistake this for forgiveness or reconciliation. Our marriage, it's over. Her head shot up, eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. Michael, please. I held up my hand, silencing her. Don't. I can't. I won't let you explain right now. You've done enough damage. Her face crumpled, and for a brief moment, I almost faltered. Almost. But then I remembered the months, no, years, of her lies. The nights she told me she was working late. The trips to visit her sick aunt. The odd phone calls where she'd step outside, her voice lowering into an almost imperceptible whisper. All the red flags I ignored, chalking them up to my own insecurities. I wasn't insecure, I was blind. As Sophia retreated upstairs to the guest bedroom, I stayed rooted to the spot, staring at the empty space she'd just vacated. My thoughts were a whirlwind, crashing into each other like waves during a storm. I knew this moment would come eventually, the moment I'd have to face her betrayal and decide what kind of man I wanted to be on the other side of it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, staring at the wall as my mind replayed every significant moment of our marriage. The day we met at a friend's barbecue. Her laugh, which used to feel like music, now sounded hollow in my memory. Our wedding day, her smile brighter than the sun, her vows filled with promises she clearly never intended to keep. Had any of it been real? Or had I been a convenient placeholder while she lived her double life? By morning, I knew what I had to do, not for her, but for me. I had to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my sanity. When Sophia came downstairs, her face puffy from a night of crying, she opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. Sophia, I meant what I said last night. You can stay for now, but you need to start making plans to leave. This house, this life we built together, it's no longer yours. Her lips trembled. Michael, I know I don't deserve your kindness, but I'm begging you to hear me out. I was selfish. I made a terrible mistake. But please, don't throw me out like this. I have no one else. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was bitter and humorless. No one else? You mean the other family you lied to me about? The one you chose over us? She flinched, her eyes filling with tears again. They don't want me anymore, she whispered, her voice breaking. I lost them, Michael. I've lost everything. Her words should have softened me, but they didn't. If anything, they hardened my resolve. I wasn't responsible for her choices or the consequences of them. She made her bed. Multiple beds, it seemed, and now she had to lie in them. You lost everything because you threw it away, I said, my tone even. I didn't make you lie to me, Sophia. I didn't make you betray our marriage. That was all you. And now, you have to face the consequences of those actions. The next few days were tense. Sophia stayed in the guest room, and we barely spoke. When we did, it was out of necessity, questions about bills, groceries, or mail. I kept my interactions with her brief, not out of cruelty but self-preservation. I couldn't let myself get pulled back into her orbit, not when I was finally starting to see a way forward without her. In the quiet moments, I began to rediscover myself. I took long walks, something I hadn't done in years. I started cooking again, simple meals, but they tasted better than anything I'd made in ages. I even dusted off my old guitar, the one I used to play before life got too busy and complicated. These small acts felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been lost in the shadows of our marriage. Sophia, on the other hand, seemed to shrink with each passing day. She tried to talk to me a few times, but I always shut her down, not out of spite, but because I knew talking wouldn't change anything. Words couldn't undo years of lies. They couldn't rebuild trust that had been shattered. On the 5th day, I came home to find Sophia sitting at the kitchen table with a packed bag by her side. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. I'm leaving, she said quietly. Thank you for letting me stay, even after everything I did. You're a better man than I deserve. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As she walked out the door, I felt an odd mix of relief and sadness. Relief that the chapter was finally closing, but sadness for the years I'd spent loving someone who wasn't who I thought she was. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. The weight of Sophia's betrayal was still there, but it felt lighter somehow. I knew I had a long way to go, but for the first time, I felt like I was truly on the path to healing. And that, more than anything, gave me hope. I didn't hear from Sophia for a while after she left. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, I began to feel more like myself again. The house was quieter, almost peaceful, but every now and then, I'd find something that reminded me of her. A stray earring on the nightstand, a favorite mug in the kitchen cabinet. Each discovery felt like a small sting, but I reminded myself that healing wasn't a straight line. Grief and anger came in waves, but so did moments of clarity and strength. It was during one of those calm moments that I got the first call. An unknown number popped up on my phone, and though I usually ignore those, something compelled me to answer. Michael. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. It's me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. What do you want, Sophia? She hesitated. I don't know where else to turn. Her words hung in the air, heavy and desperate. Part of me wanted to hang up right then and there, to preserve the fragile peace I had built in her absence. But curiosity got the better of me. What's going on? There was a long pause on the other end. followed by a muffled sob. "They've destroyed me, Michael. Everything I built, it's gone." I didn't respond immediately, unsure if I even wanted to know the details. But she continued, her voice breaking with each word. My other husband. He found out everything. He told everyone. The neighbors, his family, even the school where our kids go. Now I can't even show my face in the neighborhood. People look at me like I'm some kind of monster. I should have felt sorry for her. I should have felt something. But all I felt was a hollow numbness. "What did you expect, Sophia?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "You lied to him, just like you lied to me. Actions have consequences." She let out a bitter laugh. "Consequences? Michael, you don't understand. I've lost everything. My home, my kids, they don't even want to see me anymore. My daughter told me she hates me." For a moment, her words cut deeper than I anticipated. I pictured a young girl, innocent and confused, grappling with the betrayal of a mother she trusted. It wasn't fair to those children, just as it hadn't been fair to me. "I don't know what you want me to do about it, Sophia," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. "You made your choices. You decided to live this double life, and now you're dealing with the fallout. I can't fix this for you." She cried harder, her breaths coming in sharp, shallow gasps. "I know I don't deserve your help. I know I ruined everything. But, Michael, I have no one else. Please, just let me talk to you. I need someone to listen." I didn't have the heart to hang up, but I didn't have the energy to offer her comfort, either. So, I stayed silent, letting her pour out her misery while I stared at the wall, wondering how we had ended up here. This wasn't the life I had envisioned when I stood at the altar, promising to love and cherish her forever. This wasn't the life either of us had envisioned. Over the next few weeks, I heard snippets of her downfall from mutual acquaintances. Her second husband had gone out of his way to ensure everyone knew about her betrayal. He'd posted about it online, sharing screenshots of text messages and emails as proof of her deceit. The community she had been a part of, the one she left me for, had turned on her completely. Friends cut ties, neighbors whispered behind her back, and she became a pariah in her own world. Even her children, the ones she claimed to love more than anything, wanted nothing to do with her. I imagined the pain of that rejection, the same pain I had felt when she left me without warning. But unlike her, I hadn't caused it. Sophia tried to reach out again, showing up at my doorstep one rainy evening, drenched and trembling. She looked like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her hair unkempt, her eyes hollow. "Michael, please," she begged, her voice barely audible. "I just need a place to stay for a little while, just until I figure things out." I stared at her, my heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. I saw the woman I had loved for years, the woman who once made me believe in forever. But I also saw the woman who had betrayed me, who had lied and deceived and left me to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. "You can't stay here, Sophia," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "I've already started moving on, and you need to figure out how to do the same. This house, this life, it's not yours anymore." She nodded slowly, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her despair. "I understand," she whispered. I'm sorry, Michael, for everything." I watched her walk away, her figure disappearing into the night. And as the rain continued to fall, I felt an odd sense of closure. Sophia's fall from grace had been swift and brutal, but it wasn't my burden to carry. She had made her choices, and now she was living with them. As for me, I knew I had a long road ahead, but it was mine to walk. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to take the next step. It's strange how life moves on, even when you think it can't. At first, the days after Sophia's departure were filled with an eerie silence, a quiet that felt both suffocating and liberating. The absence of her presence, her voice, her scent, it was jarring, like a missing piece of a puzzle you weren't sure you wanted to complete. But that silence became my ally, a blank canvas on which I could start rebuilding. The first step in reclaiming my life was letting go of the house. It wasn't an easy decision. This was the home where Sophia and I had planned our future, where we had laughed, fought, and dreamed. But every corner, every wall, carried the weight of memories I no longer wanted to shoulder. So, I called a realtor, packed up my belongings, and put the house on the market. I'll never forget the last time I stood in that living room, my hand resting on the doorknob as I looked around one final time. The ghost of our life together lingered in the air, but I didn't feel sadness. I felt relief. That chapter of my life was over, and I was ready to start writing the next one. I moved to a city about 2 hours away, a fresh start, far enough to leave the past behind, but close enough to keep my connections intact. The new apartment was smaller, cozier, and completely mine. No shared closets, no lingering traces of Sophia. Just me and the quiet hum of possibility. At first, I didn't know what to do with all the free time I suddenly had. For years, my life had revolved around Sophia, her needs, her schedule, her whims. Now, I was free to focus on myself, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. I started small. I joined a local book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never found the time for. It felt strange at first, sitting in a circle with strangers, discussing novels and themes and character arcs. But over time, those strangers became friends, and those meetings became a highlight of my week. I also reconnected with old hobbies. My guitar, which had been gathering dust in the corner for years, found its way back into my hands. Playing again felt like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. The music wasn't perfect, my fingers stumbled over chords, and my voice cracked on high notes, but it was mine, and that was enough. One afternoon, while walking through the local park, I stumbled upon a community art class. The instructor, an older man with a bushy white beard and a penchant for overalls, waved me in with a grin. "We could use another set of hands," he said, handing me a brush and a canvas. I wasn't much of an artist, but I stayed anyway, painting clumsy landscapes and abstract shapes that somehow made sense to me. It wasn't about the art, it was about the act of creating, of pouring something out of myself and onto the canvas. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself smiling more, laughing more, living more. The pain of Sophia's betrayal was still there, a dull ache that flared up every now and then, but it no longer consumed me. It was just a part of my story, a thread in the fabric of my life. I also reconnected with old friends, people I drifted away from during my marriage. At first, I was hesitant to reach out, worried they might see me as weak or pitiful, but to my surprise, they welcomed me back with open arms. We spent long evenings reminiscing over beers and burgers, sharing stories and laughter that felt like balm for my soul. One friend in particular, Greg, became my closest confidant. He'd been through his own messy divorce years earlier, and his perspective was invaluable. "You're doing better than you think, Mike," he told me one night as we sat on his porch, watching the stars. "It's not about forgetting what happened. It's about learning from it and moving forward. And trust me, you're moving forward." His words stuck with me. Moving forward didn't mean erasing the past. It meant embracing it as part of who I was and using it to shape who I wanted to become. One day, as I was unpacking a box in my new apartment, I found an old photo of Sophia and me. It was from our honeymoon, taken on a beach at sunset. We were smiling, arms wrapped around each other, the picture of newlywed bliss. I stared at the photo for a long time, my emotions a mix of nostalgia and sadness. Then, without overthinking it, I slipped it back into the box and closed the lid. That photo belonged to another time, another life. It didn't have a place in this one. Looking back, I realized Sophia's betrayal, though devastating, had been a catalyst for change. It forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been ignoring, to rediscover my passions and priorities, to build a life that was mine and mine alone. As I sat on my balcony one evening, a cup of tea in hand and the city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Life was far from perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, it was mine. It's funny how life has a way of surprising you, even after everything. I didn't expect to feel this content, this steady, peaceful rhythm in my chest that tells me I'm okay. Not just surviving, but truly okay. And yet, here I am. A new city, a new life, and a new version of me that I'm slowly learning to appreciate. Every now and then, though, I think about Sophia. I wonder where she is, what she's doing, and if she's found some semblance of peace in the chaos she created. The last I heard, she was living in a small apartment on the edge of town, estranged from her second husband and children. A mutual acquaintance mentioned seeing her at the grocery store, looking frail and tired, her once bright smile replaced by a shadow of regret. Part of me wishes I could say I feel sorry for her, but I don't. Not really. Her choices led her to where she is now, just as mine led me here. I don't carry hatred for her anymore. That's too heavy a burden to hold on to, but I can't say I feel pity, either. What I feel is indifference. And I think that's a sign of healing, isn't it? When someone who once consumed your every thought now barely crosses your mind. Still, there are moments when her face flashes in my memory. Not the Sophia who lied and cheated, but the Sophia I married. The one who laughed at my terrible jokes, who danced barefoot in the kitchen, who held my hand during thunderstorms because she knew how much I hated them. That version of her feels like a different person, a character in a story I read long ago. And maybe that's what she is now. A story, a chapter in the book of my life that I've closed but can still occasionally flip back to, if only to remind myself how far I've come. As for me, I'm thriving in ways I never thought possible. My days are filled with purpose, my evenings with calm, and my weekends with laughter and friendship. I've built a community here, a small but meaningful group of people who've become like family. Greg, with his no-nonsense advice and infectious humor, keeps me grounded. The book club has become a regular source of joy, and the art class, well, let's just say I'm no Picasso, but I'm having fun. I've even started dating again. Nothing serious, just coffee dates and casual conversations, but it feels good to put myself out there, to be seen as someone worth getting to know. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm not defined by what happened to me. I'm not Michael, the betrayed husband. I'm just Michael, and that's enough. The other day, I came across an old journal I used to keep before I met Sophia. Flipping through the pages, I found an entry where I'd written about my dreams for the future. Be happy, I'd scribbled in bold letters, underlining it twice. Not perfect, just happy. It struck me how simple that dream was, and yet how far I drifted from it during my marriage. I spent so much time trying to make Sophia happy, trying to fix things that weren't mine to fix, that I forgot to take care of myself. But now, as I sit here with a cup of tea and a warm blanket draped over my legs, I realize I've finally found that happiness I wrote about all those years ago. It's not flashy or grand. It's quiet and steady, like the rhythm of my heartbeat. And it's mine. As for Sophia, I wish her no ill will. I hope she finds whatever it is she's looking for, though I doubt she'll ever find it in the way she wants. Some lessons are learned the hard way, and unfortunately for her, the price of that lesson was steep. I've heard whispers that she's tried to reconnect with her children, but they've been hesitant to let her back into their lives. I can't blame them. Trust, once broken, isn't easily mended. But that's her journey, not mine. My journey is here, in this new city, in this new life I've built. It's in the friends I've made, the hobbies I've rediscovered, the peace I've found within myself. It's in the quiet mornings when the sun filters through my window and the world feels full of possibility. If I could go back and change things, stop Sophia from walking into my life, prevent the heartbreak, avoid the betrayal, would I? It's a question I've asked myself many times, and the answer is always the same. No. Because as painful as it was, that experience shaped me. It broke me open, forced me to confront parts of myself I'd been ignoring, and ultimately led me here. And here is a pretty good place to be. So, as I close this chapter of my story, I do so with gratitude. Gratitude for the lessons learned, the strength gained, and the future that lies ahead. Life isn't perfect, but it's real. And in its own messy, beautiful way, it's enough.